Hi, my name is Masha du Toit. I'm going to be talking about how to get unstuck in a writing project using a compassion-focused approach. So, being stuck, that might be you just can't write at all, or you're able to write, but you don't feel like you're getting anywhere. You're just treading water. You've kind of lost that joy of storytelling. And I'm not a therapist or a mental health professional. I'm a writer of science fiction and fantasy. Um, but I have found a lot of use in this particular modality of therapy called compassion focused therapy. It is a branch of cognitive behavioral therapy. It's evidence based. It is particularly useful if you are neurodivergent. So if you're autistic or ADHD, but it is definitely useful for anyone. And I'm going to be particularly talking about self-regulation and using the techniques of compassion focused therapy to help you, do things you find it difficult to do. So self-regulation usually refers to, managing your emotions, getting yourself to do things or stop doing things. And we tend to use these three different systems of self-regulation. There's the threat system, the drive system, and the soothe system. And let's look at the threat system first of all. Threat system is all about avoiding danger, and it is probably the system that a lot of us are the most familiar with. Our parents and teachers have taught us how to use the system because it's all about telling yourself that if you don't work or if you don't do the thing you're supposed to be doing, bad things are going to happen. And it puts you into this emergency mode where you're able to do the work because you're afraid. It's all about fight and flight. And what happens in your body is it releases the hormones adrenaline and cortisol, which stimulates your sympathetic nervous system, which is involved when you are in physical danger and you need to be able to run and fight and focus and not relax and sleep. Um, it actually diverts the resources away from digestion and the systems that are involved in sleeping. And long term, it leads to burnout. This is not a state that you can stay in permanently. The second system that I want to mention is the drive system, and where the threat system was getting away from danger. The drive system is about moving towards a reward. It is about things that motivate you, things that you enjoy. And it is a lot more individual than the threat system is. So, to make a generalization, um, most human beings tend to generally fear the same things, right? We might have slightly different focuses. Maybe some of us are much more worried about being humiliated. Some of us are desperately worried about bad things happening to our loved ones. But, fear, pain, death, sickness, those horrible things that I don't even really want to mention, those are pretty universal fears, and most people will, it will get them going. And the thing about being a writer is that you probably have a particularly strong imagination, and it is one of the amazing things about human beings that when we imagine something, especially a dangerous thing, our bodies respond as if that thing is really happening. So when you engage that threat system and you tell yourself, okay, if I don't do this work, I'm going to lose my job, and then I won't be able to pay my rent, and it goes along that road. And the next minute, your heart is beating, you're shaking, you're reacting as if there's a real physical danger threatening you, when actually all that's happening is that you are conjuring it up in your imagination. So let's get back to the drive system. As I was mentioning, the drive system is more individual. So what engages your drive system is going to be very different from somebody else's. Some people really love playing games. Some people love socializing. Some people love being sporty and exercising. Some people love arguing with people. Um, some people love knitting and doing sort of more contemplative, challenging things. And the drive system is often quite competitive. It might be about internal or external validation. So you kind of get motivated by imagining, okay, if I do this thing, people will admire me. I will show them, just amazing what they're going to think of me. Or you might be thinking of, if I do this thing, I'm going to feel so good about myself. And the drive system, if employed correctly, will put you into that amazing flow state where you are working to your full potential. You are just in the flow of creating and learning, and it's just perfect. The brain chemical involved here is dopamine. That is very often associated with short-term reward, but more in a more sort of complete view of dopamine. It is actually an essential part of the system that motivates us. If you've ever taken some anti-anxiety or depression medication, sometimes that will interfere with your dopamine system and it will make it very difficult for you to do things like being able to get out of bed or do the chores that you normally do without thinking. And that's because your brain is no longer able to absorb dopamine in the way that it used to be able to. And the drive system is something that requires energy, but it tends to enrich you. It's not exhausting in the bad way like the threat system very often is. And the last self-regulation system that I want to mention here is the soothe system. This is the one where we're talking about relaxing and de-stressing. And soothe system in general, I feel like as adults, especially, we tend to feel like self-indulgent. You're a grown-up now, you no longer need to be babied, all of those sorts of things. It's just not true. All humans need and deserve rest and ease. Just like the drive system, the soothe system is extremely individual. What you're going to find soothing is probably going to be quite different from what I do. Here's some typical soothe system activities like snuggling with a pet, hugging a loved one, taking deep, slow breaths, being in nature. I, for example, find it incredibly soothing to listen to sounds of the ocean or sounds of rain. It just feels like I flipped a switch in my brain that just lets me relax. The parasympathetic nervous system is the opposite, as it were, of the sympathetic nervous system. If you remember, the threat system engages your sympathetic nervous system, which puts you in fight or flight. The parasympathetic nervous system does the opposite. It allows you to come down from that state into a state where you can actually sleep. And the vagus nerve is also part of your parasympathetic nervous system. So doing web search for things that stimulate the vagus nerve will help you a lot. And the brain chemical involved in this particular state is oxytocin, which is what allows us to bond with other living beings. Here's some examples of soothe system activities. In general, it tends to be about getting out of your head and back into your body. Because just like the threat system, you're conjuring up these dangers in your mind and your body responds as if those dangers are real. With the soothe system, how it tends to work is that you do things that you would only do if you were safe. And eventually your nervous system starts responding by believing that you are safe. So for instance, doing grounding exercises, a typical one would be like you just sit quietly and you go like, okay, where are my feet? Where are my hands? What can I hear in the distance? What can I see? And that kind of gets you out of that anxiety spiral. Progressive muscle relaxation is an extremely useful exercise. In the resources I've shared with you, there are links to how to do these things. Box breathing, people tend to go on about breathing as a relaxation technique and being incredibly important. It's because it really is. Breathing is one of the most fundamental ways that you can show your body that it is safe. Splashing cold water on your face, putting an ice pack on your neck doesn't sound particularly soothing, but it has this physiological effect of waking up your parasympathetic nervous system. Things like a weighted blanket, a compression vest, those things might work for you as well. Stimming, which means a repetitive thing that you do that helps you regulate your emotions. Something like bouncing your knee, tapping your fingers, playing with a fidget toy, listening to a same song over and over again. These things that you just find really deeply soothing. Stimming is often associated with neurodivergent people. If you're autistic or ADHD, you will be stimming, but everybody does stim. It's just that neurodivergent people in general are often more stressed, so we need to stim more. And to finish off this little section about the self-regulation systems, keep in mind that it's not that one of these systems is bad and one of them is good, or you have to avoid one completely and only put yourself in the other. It's about balance. Threat system is generally overused by us very often because it's kind of easy to fall into that habit. But a threat system is often necessary because there might be real dangers that you need to remind yourself of in order to get yourself to do something. That's not it's a totally valid thing. So just keep in mind that you have balance and that you're adapting to your context, which of these systems you're employing. And let's look at the reasons for getting stuck in writing, because no, we haven't spoken about writing at all yet. I find in my life, if I'm stuck with the writing process, it is either because I'm exhausted, because the motivation strategies that I'm trying to use are just not working for me, or there's something wrong with my story and my subconscious knows it and won't let me move on until I fixed it. And now, if you consider that, if you try to use, for instance, the strategies that would help you motivate you, and the reason why you can't write is because you're exhausted, that's going to be a problem. It doesn't matter how hard you motivate yourself. If you're exhausted, you have to rest. So it's quite important to do some introspection and self-examination and decide which of these problems are actually true in your case so that you can use the right tools and techniques. And let's look at exhaustion. Now, if you are exhausted, the first thing that you have to do is reduce that threat system and engage the soothe system. You can't scare yourself out of being tired. Um, Often what happens with exhaustion is that you get stuck in a writing project because you've convinced yourself that if you stop writing, if you give up on a story or decide not to write anymore on this particular project, that you are wasting all of the time that you've put into it. Now, that's a sunk cost fallacy. Sunk cost fallacy is when we've put a certain amount of time or money or resources into something and then we refuse to give it up, even if it's not working, because we believe that then all of those resources that we spend will have gone for nothing. And it's not true. Maybe you've spent 5 years working on a project and you know that it's just not working and you're just like forcing yourself to continue with it. But those 5 years you've spent, you have learned an enormous amount. You have developed as a writer. You are not the same writer now that you were 5 years ago or whenever you started on that project. That time is not wasted. Whether or not you finish the story is almost irrelevant. Rediscover the joy of storytelling while you are resting. So you can, you know, fill up your creative tank by reading your comfort book, watching a show that you love, watching movies, and do so with a writer's brain engaged so that you notice how you are responding to that story. You're not actively writing and exhausting yourself. You're, nurturing yourself, but you do so in this awareness way where you're, for instance, like let's say you're watching a show and you realize, oh, I'm quite engaged in this. How did they do that? Like, why is it that I care so much about this character? Like, exactly what is it that they did to make me feel that I really want to know what's going to happen next? Or maybe you find your mind drifting and you realize, I'm bored with this story. What's wrong? How would I fix it if I was in charge? And if you are exhausted, it is very important to be aware of your window of tolerance. And that when you're tired, your window of tolerance is smaller. So, what is meant by the window of tolerance? When you are being creative or you're learning something new, that inherently involves input and stimulation. If there's too little input, you're going to get under your window of tolerance. You're going to be sleepy, you're going to be feel lazy and tired and exhausted and depressed. If there's too much input, you're going to start feeling stressed, overstimulated, possibly even afraid or angry. And between those extremes is the window of tolerance, which is that ideal state for learning and creating where you are energized enough to be able to focus, but you're also relaxed enough. Now, learning and creativity happens when you push the boundaries of your window of tolerance. So you might have heard of this concept called exposure therapy. So, for instance, let's say somebody is afraid and absolutely terrified of dogs, and then they can learn to overcome that fear by being exposed to the fear, by interacting with dogs in such a way that your body and your nervous system realizes this dog is not actually that dangerous, and you get over that phobia. Now, the reason why this is the thing that a lot of people misunderstand about exposure therapy is that it does require the input of an experienced therapist to do it properly. Because if you simply expose yourself to your fear way past your window of tolerance, you're just going to be terrified and re-traumatized. It's not going to help you. What you do is you introduce yourself to that fear just outside of your comfort zone so that you can gradually get used to it. And the same is true for your creative project. Push those boundaries of your window of tolerance just enough, and both the upper and the lower. Sometimes focusing more, being more energized, that's going to be where the good stuff happens. But sometimes it might mean taking it a little bit more easy than you're used to, relaxing, be a little bit more meditative, letting your brain open up, getting a little bit more unfocused to get those happy creative accidents happening. Sometimes for some of us, it is actually quite difficult to do that, to just be quiet and patient and let things take their own course. So you're going to be, with your self-knowledge, know which of those two challenges is the one that you should be focusing on. And the second reason for stuckness is often that your motivation strategies are just not working. You're trying the things that your parents and teachers taught you, or your colleagues, or where you read in self-help books or writing advice, and you're beating yourself up. You're telling yourself that you're lazy, what's wrong with you? And this is now the problem with finding motivation strategies that work for you. The first thing that you need to do is to reduce that threat system, because it is very likely you're overusing it. And to engage the drive system to find motivation strategies that work for you as an individual person. It doesn't matter what works for other people. Maybe you're the only person in the world that needs this particular strategy. Who cares? Fantastic if you find it. And this is the thing about reducing the threat system, is that you've got to stop that negative self-talk. Now, even if I say that, I must admit that you're probably never going to be able to stop it, but you want to create a little bit of distance between yourself and that scolding inner voice. Because for a lot of us, we can't stop the negative self-talk. That's fine. You can take the heat out of it, though. And this technique really does work. All you have to do is note. When you notice that you are saying horrible things to yourself, or you're putting yourself into that scolding frame of mind, just note it. Okay, I have just told myself that I'm an idiot. Interesting. And you do so in a non-judgmental way, because it's also pointless to kind of get into this, oh, I have just judged myself. What's wrong with me? And now you're judging yourself for being judgmental. And, it's just another spiral. So what you do is you just note it, give it a neutral title. Oh, I'm ruminating right now. I'm having an argument with an imaginary person. I am predicting something which might or might not happen. And by doing that, you're putting a little bit of space between yourself and your thoughts and feelings, because your emotions might feel very real and very big, and your thoughts feel very overwhelming, but they're still not reality. And if you can put that little bit of space, a little bit of distance, a bit of a reality check, it can really help you to move on and get into a different frame of mind, a more, useful frame of mind. Watch out in particular for when you are using the words should and just to yourself. I should be able to do this. Why can't I just do this? Who cares if you should be able to? Who says that? Who's the authority? You are the authority on yourself. You just have to notice what actually does work and not what should work. And on the other end of the scale, don't lie to yourself. It can be sometimes people think positive affirmations means that you're going to tell yourself, oh, I'm going to be a fantastic writer and I'm going to definitely get a publishing contract and everybody's going to love my book and I'm going to write every day. And you think that that's being positive. And actually, there's a little voice in yourself going like, maybe not. I don't know if that's true because you don't know that. You can't predict the future. So find ways to talk to yourself that you can actually believe. That's going to depend on your personality. For me, it's very much like I will affirm myself. Yep, right now I'm feeling tired. That's understandable. Then I will find a statement that is true, but not negative. Like, yeah, I am going to probably find it difficult to write now, but I've done it before. I can do it again. I'm going to cope. There's an example of the kind of self-talk I do. So realistic self-compassion is better than bright-siding yourself. And here's some examples of engaging that drive system. You're going to want to move towards reward rather than away from fear. And set realistic goals. The best way to set yourself up for failure is to set up big, vague goals. Like, I'm going to write every day, which is advice that's very often given. It might work for a lot of people. I'm going to write is too vague. What does that exactly mean? Every day, setting yourself up for failure because inevitably life happens and now you haven't done it and now you feel bad and now it's more difficult to do it the next day. Rather, set a goal that is tiny and really you just know, okay, I'm definitely going to be able to write on a Friday afternoon when I know there's no one else at home for 20 minutes and I'm going to set a timer. Identify and remove obstacles. This is once again about self-knowledge. So you notice your actual setup, like what is it that is exactly stopping you? Every time when you want to start writing, okay, now you first have to find your laptop or your laptop charger or clean your desk. And now you get distracted because you pick up something and now, you realize that you actually should be doing the laundry or whatever. Notice those distractions and that process that happens. And so for instance, in that case, if that's what's happening for you, then setting up your laptop ahead of time will help, and build routines and pleasurable rituals based on pleasure and reward. So you're going to, for instance, before I start writing, I will make myself a cup of tea. I'll put on my noise cancelling headphones and I'll start playing my nature sounds. And by doing that, my body is in that space where it realizes, okay, it's writing time now. I know how this goes. And each time you do that successfully, it is a lot easier to get into that writing frame of mind. And of course, not all writing happens when you're sitting down. Sometimes you need to go for a walk. Sometimes you have your best ideas when you're having a shower. That's all just what you need to do there. Now, here's an example of a technique that I use to stop myself from getting derailed, and it is my questions and idea dump. So what tends to happen for me often is, let's say I've managed to start writing. I'm actually writing. And then I realize, okay, hold on a second. This doesn't entirely make sense. Why would this character do this? There's a plot hole. But hold on, I don't know actually how an internal combustion engine works. Do I need to go and research that? But no, this doesn't make sense at all. And next minute I'm derailed and I go, okay, I'm going to have a break and I stop writing and, that I'm no longer writing anymore and it's a problem. So instead, I create separate documents for the questions and idea dumps. And as they come up, I just write them down. have them open. I use either Obsidian or Scrivener, which makes it very easy. But I mean, you can use any word processing program. You just have a document open for your questions. And when that question comes up, hold on a second, but I'm not actually sure whether it's possible to do that, or I've got to check whether this and that character would actually do that, whatever it is. You just write it out in that document in no particular order. It can be a total mess. And when you have ideas as well, like, oh, yeah, no, there's the scene idea that maybe they should all be in a railway carriage or whatever it happens to be, instead of now starting to write that scene and getting distracted from what you're doing, you'd make a note of it and you know that you can come back to it later. And this is the real joy of my questions and idea dump document, because next time when I am actually feeling quite low and tired and I really don't feel up to actually writing, I open my questions document and I start reading through it and I go, which of these questions is irrelevant? Which of them can I delete? Oh, here's a question I know how to answer. Let's go for it. And the next minute I am actually writing. You really want to engage that pleasure gamification brain. And, I personally believe there's no such thing as procrastination, really. So procrastinate for, getting yourself into that writing groove, create playlists for your characters, create vision boards for them, any way that you can get back to that joy of storytelling and remind yourself why you started writing in the first place. Use organizational tools. It might be timers, to-do lists. You might reward yourself. Um, I like using programs like Scapple or Obsidian, which allow me to create graphs and make different bits of things, different colors, and overlay them and link them together. The little screenshot here is of Obsidian, which has its graph view. And here's some examples of Scapple, which is a mind mapping tool. At this point here, it's just I had some trouble with the timeline and character motivations and so on, and Scapple really lets me just visualize it much more easily. You might prefer to do a pen and paper version of this. There's no wrong way. Here's some other motivation tools that really work for me. Accountability. You just tell someone, I'm going to finish this chapter by the end of the week. Put it up on social media, tell your partner, however you do it. I find very often it doesn't actually even matter if the other person even cares or knows, just the fact that I've told somebody. That accountability thing really does work. Have a writer partner, whatever it takes. Body doubling. Body doubling is when you are working with somebody, but independently. So you're both in the same room or on the same Zoom call or whatever it takes. You're both on your same project. You're not even talking to each other. You're not interacting, but you've got that chill working vibe going because you're both focused. And this is actually the method I use when I am really stuck and low, is I just tell myself that I can do it because my head is so filled with myself telling myself, oh, I don't feel like it. I'm not going to be able to write today. And maybe I should just give up. I mean, all this kind of nonsense. Change that narrative into, yeah, I can actually write today. Today I am going to write. So once again, overly positive bright siding often doesn't work. Keep it realistic, but just pretend to yourself that you can do it. And it gently and with compassion, sometimes it really does do the trick. And the last reason where you might be wrong is something is wrong with your story. Now, this is fixing that is a whole other section of many talks. So I've just picked out one or two techniques that kind of fit in with a compassionate, focused way of doing things. There are many, many other ways. The first is the rubber duck technique, which is, I always find it slightly distracting that it's called a rubber duck because it might be called anything at all. Because what it actually is, it's a problem-solving technique used by computer programmers, where they put a little rubber duck next to their keyboard and they tell them what the problem is that they're trying to solve. So obviously it doesn't need to be a rubber duck. I tend to use a imaginary, infinitely patient person who is extremely interested in my story. And I just tell them, okay, so my story is about this and such and this and the other. And then I talk out loud. I personally find it works better to simply talk out loud, but I'm in a context where I'm often alone, so I don't need to be embarrassed about that kind of thing. And not that I am, I'm actually I just talk out loud anyway, no matter what. Um, you can also write it down. And then as you're talking, very often you will start realizing, hold on, this whole section that I'm explaining, it's kind of boring. Maybe I should just skip it, you know? Or, yeah, I forgot about this, but this is actually where my interest lies. So you kind of talk and then keep sort of your pulse of where your interest goes. And here's another section. Very often as writers, we can get paralyzed by choice because we're in charge of that story. There are so many different ways in which you can tell your story. And sometimes it can kind of feel like, well, if I make this happen, then all of these other things can happen. And it's so complicated. I can't predict which branch I should be following. And I find my maybe trees, what I call it, helps a lot where I don't commit myself to a choice, but I still explore it. It seems kind of silly, but just the fact of telling myself maybe helps me to feel a little bit protected in exploring these ideas. So I just write out what the question is, and then I give all my potential answers and start each one with a maybe. And also, once again, keeping my pulse, a watch on my like how interested I am, which of these options are boring, which I'm just writing down because I'm being a completionist, and which is like, aha, this actually feels true. This is cool. That's the one you should be following. Find the story spark that interests you. And of course, this is the thing about being stuck. Be very careful about if you're the kind of person who thinks yourself as a perfectionist, because perfectionism it sounds like a good thing, but it's rooted in fear. So we're talking about that threat system again. You are afraid that you are going to fail because you believe that making mistakes is a bad thing. Your job is not to avoid making mistakes. Your job as a writer is to learn from your mistakes, and you cannot learn from them unless you make them. There are many right answers to story problems. You might be feeling like, oh my goodness, how am I going to find the little jewel of rightness in all of this mess? The fact is, you are surrounded by amazing possibilities and potential. Any of the answers to the story problems you find might be the beautiful one. There are many beautiful ones. If you are, like many of us, unsure if you really are a writer or if you really should be doing this, that is not that is not proof that you're not really a writer. In fact, if anybody uses the phrase a real writer, you should stop listening to them because they're probably going to give you bad advice. Except I just used that phrase, but never mind. Um, if you have self-doubt, that is not proof that that is true. You may never feel completely confident as a writer, and that is okay. I can almost guarantee you, many of your favorite writers that you admire and think are just the best, if you were to have a conversation with them, you would find that they have just as much doubt as you do. And I want to end this with just this thought about self-compassion, because with all of these things, it's all about self-compassion and being kind and patient with yourself. Forgiveness means letting go the hope for a better past. If you are hard on yourself, think about what you're doing. Self-acceptance is hard, but it is essential. Thank you for listening to my talk about getting unstuck in your writing project. And good luck.